now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show with your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
It is the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show on 860 AM WNOV and W293CX 106.5 live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So happy you've taken a little time out of your Saturday to join us on the program. Some things that disappoint you is when you do activities in the garden because you've been told or read or been advised that this is what you do because this is what it's always been done. Well, we're going to go over some more myths or debunking common garden myths that you probably have done or know somebody who does do that doesn't make any sense. There's no scientific proof behind it. And
I think kind of no matter what you do, there's always some sort of myths. There's crafting myths, sailing myths, all sorts of things.
Well, we are not in that realm. So
I'm just saying.
Yeah, in all aspects. Yeah. Right. There's things that you always do. Why do you do it that way? Well, that's what I've been taught.
Right.
So let's go over some of these here.
One I think is good is to always stake young trees. And why is that wrong?
Not all trees need to be staked when they are planted. Some very young trees need to be left to sway in the wind. That develops a thicker trunk on them and sturdier branches. If you lock these things down like it's a radio tower on a hill, they're going to be weak because they're going to rely on the straps of that device that you use to hold them down. And those straps, if put on too tight, will actually grow into the tree as the tree absorbs them into the bark of it. It's not a good thing. While grafted trees and other older than 2 years really don't need to be staked. I mean, they've established that structure in the trunk. And this is very similar to starts or seedling starts. You want to add a little air circulation around them so they sway in the fanned wind in the grow room because they'll strengthen up the stalk so they're not just put outside and they snap over when the first wind hits. So there is some things. Now, if you're going to tie down a tree or you feel it's necessary, one, you want to do your research, and two, you want to establish not tight straps. You want it to be loose to where it has a little flexibility. Yes, if a 90-mile-an-hour wind comes, it's not going to uproot it. It's going to catch itself, but it's going to add some, allow the tree to do some flexing on it. So don't always stake down your trees when you plant them.
Right. So the other one is that if you put pea and bean roots or legume roots in the soil, say like you do, they call it like a chop and drop type of thing. If you put that in the soil, that will affix nitrogen into the soil.
Beans, peas are legumes. There's other ones that will actually help the soil build nutrients. But the myth is that when you dig up a pea or a bean plant, you look at the roots and there's little balls or nodules on them, and that's where that nitrogen is fixed for the plant to absorb in order to grow correctly. The theory is, okay, you've got the bean plant, it's done its thing, you cut it off at the base and you let the roots stay in the ground. That nitrogen left in the roots will help feed the soil. Well, there's not really any nitrogen left. The plant has used up everything that it has stored for its reproductive procedures in order to put the fruit on. So it doesn't do any good. Now, there are different cover crops in which you plant, they grow to a certain stage, you cut them like Holly said, you allow them to fall on the ground and you work them into the soil, and that nitrogen in the plant will actually break down and basically compost in the soil and feed your soil. Yes, but it's not the roots releasing that excess nitrogen that it has built up, because it hasn't built up. It acquires what it needs in order to flourish and do its growth cycle. That's the reason why that is so misunderstood.
Right. So then there's also, what's the next one?
Gardening myth. Here's another one. Gardens need 15 minutes of water each day to flourish.
Right. So,
and we've talked about this, an inch a week. So, why is this not the truth?
There's just too many variables. Basically, there could be things where your plant then. So the rule of thumb is 1 inch per week, either by irrigation or rainfall. So there's many variables. So if it's 15 minutes of water each day, that could be how much water are you putting on? How much,
are we dripping?
Are we dripping? Yeah, are we dripping? Are we spraying it right onto the plants? How are you doing that? So there's just too many, as they say, it doesn't apply because there's too many variables. Just like statistics, there's always variables. That's one of them.
And the other issue with this, by watering 15 minutes a day, you're not allowing the water to penetrate through the soil to reach the roots deeper than just shallow. By just watering the top inch or so, you're going to allow plants to develop very shallow roots. And this is a bad thing because the roots need to grow deep in order to pick up nutrients that is in the soil. And by shallow roots, they're easier to be uprooted by a real big rain, or wind. And it doesn't create a healthy plant. Shallow roots, it doesn't. You want a long watering duration. Drip irrigation for 45 minutes, an hour and a half. A lot of these drip irrigation systems, each emitter will only produce a half gallon an hour, but it's at the root zone, so it drips directly down. And you figure a half gallon an hour at a drip, you're going to saturate a lot of soil around the roots and get that water to go down deeper. And the deeper the water goes, the deeper the roots will go. The more roots it will create, the healthier the plant's going to be. So we want to keep that in mind. We just don't want to spray for 5 minutes. Oh, it looks like the top of the soil is wet. If you actually look and rake back some of that soil a half inch deep is not wet at all. You've got to really soak these plants. And fortunately for us, we've been getting rain relatively on a regular schedule here in Milwaukee, that we don't have to really worry about that. But that is something we need to be conscious of when we do go watering plants ourselves, especially in containers. The thing with containers is, and this is a lot of people have hanging baskets or containers, the container, when the soil dries out, it will actually pull away from the outer portions of the container. So when you water it, and all of a sudden you see water coming out of the bottom of the container. Well, you think, okay, I've got it watered. Well, what is happening is water is going into the container, running to the side, running down the side, inside of the pot where the soil has retracted from the side of the container, going to the drain hole and running out, so it's not really absorbing any water whatsoever. So you really have to water intensely on containers to allow that water to absorb. Or if you have like a hanging basket or a smaller container, you can actually put that into a tub of water and allow it to soak up the moisture an hour or 2 hours and let the soil completely expand with the water instead of just hitting a little bit, we're running out, oh, it's good enough, and then your plant dies because you're not allowing the water to penetrate into the container.
Well, that's many people, and what you usually want to do is you want to water until the water runs out the top, then
to the bottom,
out the bottom, so you can see it coming out, and then come back a little bit later, water it again. That way, you're getting an efficient water to it.
That's right. Another one is weed landscape fabric, the Gore-Tex, the weed barrier, that type of thing.
As a weed barrier.
Right. You look at a lot of these labels on these weed barriers. Put it on there to prevent weeds from coming up in your garden, and this will allow the water and the sunlight to penetrate through. That's not true. Based on the density of its woven.
Well, for one, a lot of times water will just puddle on top.
And try to funnel into that hole that you've got cut for your tomato or pepper plant. Right.
So that could be problematic because all of a sudden now you're watering one tiny portion, possibly flooding your plants, and the water is just in that one area. So then what happens is that the weeds underneath that fabric, yes, they may stay dormant, but as soon as you pull that fabric up and it's exposed to the air and the water, bam, you get all these weeds.
Or you put a mulch there, and then you got all these weeds, and you grab the weeds to pull, and all the mulch comes up because it's all embedded inside the mulch on top of the weed barrier, and you're trying to figure out why the plants aren't growing. Well, they can't get water, they can't get sunlight. The weeds on top have sucked up all the moisture, and you've got weeds on top of weed barrier, and your plants aren't doing that fantastic. So there is some applications in which weed barrier is good for, but for the vegetable garden, no. For some perennial beds, I wouldn't recommend it, just because it doesn't allow the water to penetrate. Now, if you get something that you allow the water to penetrate through, well, then that's the opportunity that the weeds can come back up the other way because the fabric is so loosely woven that it doesn't serve any purpose. So
the other problem is if you use this near your shrubs or trees, you're blocking the roots of those things to get water properly as well. So then a lot of times those roots will come to the surface, causing you more problems.
And finally, let's talk about marigolds to keep bad bugs out of the vegetable garden. Everybody is saying, and there's a lot of videos, a lot of people, we plant marigolds around the garden to keep the bad bugs out. Well, number one, marigolds attract spider mites. That's a big bug that you don't want on your tomatoes. That's a bad thing.
It also depends on what kind of marigolds you use.
Right.
You can't just go to your local garden center or your big box garden department and just buy the cheapo $2 for $3 packs of marigolds, because those are not the true marigolds that you want. If you are going to do this, you want to get basically the heirloom true marigolds. So those are some you would probably have to start from seeds. But just like anything that's going to, a lot of times something that's going to keep bad bugs away can also attract bad bugs as well. So that's something to consider. Just like they say marigolds keep rabbits away, you come back and the rabbits have chopped your marigolds.
Yeah, you watch your rabbits eat the marigolds around the garden one after another.
It's just a little appetizer for them.
Right. So, and not all, like you said, there's good, marigolds. You got to get the right one. And even sometimes that you may not even be able to find those plants. So you want to look at why you're doing certain things, and does it logically make sense to you? Okay, I'm putting flowers around the garden to bring in good bugs, but keep the bad bugs away, and keep the bad animals out, but I'm watching animals eat those flowers.
It's kind of like you have to live in harmony with what you have. And so sometimes you have to find an effective way to deal with something, and not saying that you're an idiot if you've done this, because
we've done
it, and a lot of people have done it. And same thing with, as we talked about last week, with the traps that keep the Japanese beetles away. It's something that you have to consider about where you're putting it, how you're doing it, and is it effective, and are you using it correctly.
Right. If you have problems with rabbits, invest in Bobex and a 2-foot poultry fence that we use around our garden, and leave it up year round. That really deters the rabbits from getting in there. There's going to be some that will get in there, but it really reduces the amount of activity that goes, because it's really hard to get bean plants to grow when the rabbits mow them down every time that they sprout out of the ground. So the Bobex and the fence really reduces the problems that we have, and a small amount of what's called poultry wire to surround your garden is perfect. If you're in the Milwaukee or surrounding areas, just tune your radio to 860 AM or FM 106.5. You can also find links on our Facebook pages, The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener and Home Canning. Our website, thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com, click on the radio tab at the top of the page, then click on the Listen Live button, and you'll have immediately access to our live program. Mobile devices work very well also. Go to your app store and download for free the TuneIn app or the Simple Radio app. Then search WNOV 860, save it to your favorites, and you can have access to our radio show live wherever you're at in the world. Our radio program will also have podcast replay under the radio tab several days following the live broadcast. You can find all of these links in the show notes below. Our show airs 9 to 10 a.m. Central Standard Time every Saturday, March through the end of October. And we want to thank our sponsors, because without them, this would not be anywhere possible. You can find all of their links under the radio tab on our website at thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.